Yo, what's going on, guys? It's the new sensation, Big Annotation here, and this past weekend we had the pleasure to travel to the UK Games Expo in Birmingham for two events there. They had a Zenkai Cup on the Saturday and then a full regionals on the Sunday, and I got the chance to play in both of those. And as you can see here, I actually had the I had the pleasure of winning both events. So on the Saturday we played in the Zenkai Cup. There was, I think, 32 players for that event. Managed to win it and obviously won this SS4 Gogeta Z leader. And then in the regionals, I believe it was fully sold out in the end, so 128 players. And we managed to win the gold SS3 leader here. And both events I ended up playing the same deck, the Self-Control Android 21. I was originally going to play something a bit more special to me, like Supreme Kai or Kumba on the Saturday, because I wasn't too stressed about the Zenkai Cup or the whole weekend in general. I was kind of just playing it or just going along to see some friends and just looking forward to the next format with the new ban list where we don't have to play against SS4, Gamma or Sin ever again, which is going to be amazing. But then I ended up winning both events anyway, so pretty happy with that. And before we get into things, I have to give a massive shout out to Tom Smith from Team Deck Planet, or Iratorum as some of you may know him. He worked with me on this deck for a really long time through thick and thin, and we both had kind of ups and downs of motivation with this deck, and we both worked through it, and we played almost exactly the same list. There was one small change in the side deck that he had that was different to mine, and I believe that he made top 8 on the Zenkai Cup, and I believe he made top 16 on the regionals as well. So a huge shout out to Tom as always. Great friend and an amazing guy to be able to play with and to work on decks with, such as this one. And he obviously did amazingly in both events as well. But we'll run straight through the deck. I've already done a deck profile on this, I believe, so I probably won't be covering like a lot of the individual cards. I'll more be covering kind of the differences between the deck going from a best of 1 pre-side format to a best of 3. And as well as maybe some changes that I might make going into the next format, but also prioritizing kind of which cards do well against which decks, so that you kind of have an idea of when to side certain cards out and when to side in certain cards, as well as which cards are just like completely untouchable. But we'll run into the deck, we'll see how things go. Obviously leader, you already know what it does. We have the main deck here. We'll run through the main deck first. We have 4 super combos. Pretty important for this deck, I won't lie. Just keep recycling the super combos and then asking your opponent to bottom deck 1, please, kind sir. And then we have our 3 different cards, all at playsets, which recycle the super combos, so the 4 Speedy Sub, the 4 Roshis, and the 4 Trading Places. I don't believe there's any situation where you ever lower the ratios of these cards. These are like, this is the core of the deck. Especially Trading Places is like a crazy card because it acts as an energy fixer and a super combo recycler, and also when you combo with it, you can use it as a draw 2 if you have Unison out. You can restand your Unison. You can fix your energy on your opponent's turn as well as recycling a super combo, which is crazy. So this card really just like fixes a lot of the consistency issues that the deck had before when it was kind of a much more rogue pick. The only situation where I'd ever consider reducing any of these ratios is potentially siding out 1 Speedy Sub against Gamma, because of the potential for them to counterplay it if you try and play any copies early on. If you're not able to remove that Unison early enough, which in game 1, if you're not siding in the black smokes because it's game 1, then they're gonna have that Unison down fairly stabilized for at least a couple of early turns in the game. And so a lot of the time this card does get sided out 1 copy of against Gamma, just to make a bit more space. But other than that, these are very much staples, and you'll find a lot of this deck is staples. There's very little space in terms of siding stuff in and out, which is why we had to really refine the side deck when it came to the deck building process, and make sure that we were only siding like a maximum of 6 or 7 cards for each matchup, and ideally we only want to be siding in about 4 cards per matchup, which does make the side deck very tricky to build, but it means that we also have a wide spread of different cards that we can side in for each specific matchup. So going on to the kind of more standard stuff as well. 4 key channeler, again, you have to run 4 key channeler. This card is actually so good. The fact that it removes a marker from a unison you would think is kind of irrelevant, especially since Black Smoke came into the format. But it's huge. Against Golden Freezer and against any yellow decks that end up siding in that Gohan unison, this card would just melt through it. And the same thing for SS4 with the SS4 unison. This is your way to kind of stabilize against SS4 if you can get this down as early as possible in game 1 when you don't have Black Smokes in. And then same thing for Gamma as well. You just use this to clear their unisons. So the fact that this removes a marker from a unison is actually really, really relevant. And it also can't be hit by the Gohan Videl, which some yellow players might side in against you to try and hit trading places if it's ever on your board. So ideally you want to be getting this guy out as your energy fixer as soon as possible. This is the priority. And it's also important to try and make sure you have one of these in energy in case they ever find ways to remove the copy that you have out on board. Because if you missequence it, there will be times where they remove your energy fixer that you have on the board and you have no way to bin your own energy anymore and you just can't draw. I did make that mistake, I think, once throughout the weekend. I don't believe it ended up costing me, luckily, because I was already in a very strong position. But yeah, it's definitely something to watch out for at that point. And the main thing is as well, if you have a copy in your energy and then they remove the one on your board, you can play the copy from your energy and then put the copy that they just removed back into your energy if they've put it to the drop area. So very important to make sure that you always have access to this card, just in the case that your opponent has some sort of barrier removal. And obviously against certain decks and certain colors, that's going to be much more relevant to watch out for. And then we have 4 Measureless Strength. This card is really insane for the deck. Like, I really underestimate how amazing this card is. But like, it's a consistency piece. It makes you get a multicolor into the drop area because of the discard effect, which means that you can start replacing your energy without like seeing a super combo. It's just a very easy multicolor to get to the drop, which is huge. Because Key Channeler doesn't put a multicolor into the drop when you play it, because it effectively just plays itself from your energy, so you need to already have a multi in your drop when you go to play Key Channeler. So that's why this card is so huge. And then also, this is your main target for the Super 17, which we're still on 2 copies of. And it's also very relevant that you can arrival this guy in, especially against the set 20 Android 21 matchup. Your ideal turns involve just kind of passing with a lot of energy open, and then if they ever drop an 8-drop and swing at you, you super combo and arrival this in to just clear the 8-drop out without using any negates, because you can't afford to use negates when there's an 8-drop down in that matchup, because you do not have the biggest hand size in the world, especially because you're probably not playing the unison all that much in that matchup either. And then you can just clear the 8-drop, you get 2 cards out of your opponent's hand, and it's a 25k critter, so it's really huge. And like I said, it's also your main target for the Super 17. We are also running 2 Bad Omens. This card doesn't get brought out off of the Super 17 all that much. This is mostly for the matchups where you can't use Super 17 or you can't get to it. So matchups like SS4 Gogeta, you're never ever getting to the tap 7. So you have to just kind of slowly burn them with Bad Omens and use Bad Omens as like a pressure piece. And also against like Golden Freezer, they have Cold Bloodlust, you're never going to go for the tap 7. And against a lot of yellow decks, especially game 2, they're going to have Death Blaster, so you have to play around that with the tap 7. So in those sorts of matchups is where you want to be going for the Bad Omens instead of using the tap 7. But keep in mind, the tap 7s pretty much never need to bring out Bad Omens. Measureless Strength is almost always just a better target, because if you're sequencing well so that you've got them to low cards in hand, if you can get them to like 3 cards in hand and then tap 7 to bring out 3 Measureless Strengths, you take 3 cards out their hand, and then you also crit them for the 3 life because it's 3 crit swings. So it's effectively like bringing out 3 Bad Omens, except you also get rid of the 3 cards out their hand. So it's just better in that sense. So a lot of the time the Measureless Strength is just the correct target to bring out off the tap 7 rather than the Bad Omen, which is why initially I was running 3 Bad Omens, but we've cut it down to 2. We've moved the 3rd copy to the side deck for specific matchups, but we'll go over that later as well. But the Bad Omens are much more of kind of a tempo piece and a pressure piece now, and sometimes even a removal piece, because most of this deck's removal is the Z deck, and so if you don't have Z energy, you need a removal piece, and this is going to offer you that. And then the main other application for this card is against Majin Vegeta, because if you get them down to 2 life, you can just crit them down to 1 and they can't use their Z leader skill, which is actually huge. So that's kind of the theory behind that. But yeah, Bad Omen is not a 3 of, it's not a 4 of. You do not want to be focusing on going for a tap 7 and burn 3 combo to win. Most games don't get to that tap 7 point, and if they do, a lot of the time, like against yellow deck specifically, they're going to have some sort of counterplay, so you need to watch out for that. And yeah, it's just not something to rely on. You need to be focusing more on the mid-game kind of hand control aspects of the deck instead, and developing and pressuring with your Unison. And speaking of your Unison, for Zamasu, the games where you don't see this feel so different to the games where you do, and the games where this card just stabilizes on the board for free because your opponent ignores it are the games where you just snowball into ridiculous, obscene hand sizes comparing to your opponents. This card, if this ever sticks onto the board for longer than a turn, you probably win that game. People just, when they play against this deck, people just need to kill this Unison. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. You cannot swing at a card that is not the Unison, because then they would trading places, draw 1 off Unison, restand, gain a marker, draw 1 off leader, replace the energy, and grab a super combo back to hand, and put a super combo back in energy. So that's effectively kind of like a +3, but they also go around the super combo cycle 2 out of 3 times, because they add 1 back to hand and they put 1 back into energy. So you just have to kill this card, and that's why the Exodia combo of this deck is like Unison plus trading places in hand plus super combo in energy, super combo in drop, and a barrier blocker. And if you ever get that setup down, it's really, really hard to lose. And then also for Kusu, up until this point, I'd say the deck this is just like standard stuff. I don't feel like you can change these ratios, and I say that still for the Kusu. There are so many times where I wanted to side out a copy just to make space to side something in, but I would, this card is just too good to side out. Like, there's never a case where I'd want to go to 3 Kusu. This card is so good in every matchup. Like, there is always a card that you want to hit in like with this card in every matchup. And then Secret Rare is obvious. This one is just broken. And if you ramp it, you just grab it back to hand. Yeah, so like I said, up until that point, I think the list is fairly standard. I don't think there's anything you can change or side out in that list, other than the 1 speedy sub, which I mentioned. And then sometimes you can side out a Super 17 if the games aren't, like, if it's a game where you're not going to rely on the Super 17 and you can't side out anything else. Because the value of the Super 17 is that it's still a turn 1 check land, which is actually really valuable for this deck. Because there are some matchups where you want to be using the turn 1 trading places so that you can get a turn 2 ramp off safely, and have an energy untapped going into the opponent's turn with your Awaken. And yeah, it's I don't see myself ever changing or siding out any of the cards that we've just been through, except for the 1 speedy sub, and then sometimes the 1 tap 7 against SS4, probably like maybe Sin sometimes, depending on how much I'm siding in against Sin, but I wouldn't see myself siding in that much against Sin. And then against like a lot of yellow decks, the tap 7 goes down to 1 copy as well because of Cold Bloodlust and Death Blaster. And you're just kind of using Bad Omens as pressure pieces against yellow instead of tapping 7. And then these last cards are kind of the, I'd say, more flexible spots. These are the cards that we would change in and out a lot more. And those are the 2 Android 17 Restrained Support. In a best of 3 format, you have to have Self-Awakeners main decked, because you cannot go against an opponent who doesn't swing at you, doesn't let you awaken for turns on end, and is playing a deck that can build advantage without swinging. And then just like not have a way to awaken yourself. We opted for this card in the main deck over the Gohans because of a couple of reasons. The first one is that this card cannot be, if it gets counterplayed, you still get to take a life, which is huge, because T-Blow is a massive card, and against Gamma, the Android 18 counterplay is a massive card, and if you go second and you turn 1 Gohan, they can still T-Blow it. So with this card, that doesn't happen. And this card pairs really nicely with turn 1 surmounting, which I'm a massive, massive advocate for in this deck. Turn 1 surmounting against some matchups and against a lot of decks is a crazy, crazy strong play. Against decks like Golden Freezer, if you get the chance to get as the energy, and against like Margin Vegeta, against pretty much any yellow deck that can T-blow you, if they ever play a 1-drop turn 1, you can just turn 1 surmounting, and then if you find a copy of this, then there's no way that they can stop your Awaken, which is so huge, such a huge blow in that matchup. The other reasons we decided to run this over the Gohan in the main deck is because it's searchable off of all of our Android searches, which is again huge. More accessibility to the tech choices is always a plus. It's a 0 for 5k, whereas Gohan is a 1 for 10k, and it's also a mono blue card. The fact that Gohan is a mono green card is only relevant when siding in the 5-drop Boo, and a lot of the time you side those cards in together, so it's not as good in the main deck. You'd rather just have it in the side deck and then side both the cards into the matchups where you need them, rather than just having a random clunky green 1-cost 10k in your deck as well, when this deck has a lot of 1-cost 10ks anyways. And then also this happens to have the added benefit of being an energy fixer, and also some added removal, which has come up quite a few times when just playing this deck in game 1s. If you need the removal, you just play this guy for 2, bin off a multicolor, fix your energy, and then pop something. And it's a 20k swing, so it's really not bad of a card. So that's kind of the reasoning behind running that over a Gohan or 2 in the main. And there are Gohans in the side, and there are some matchups where those come in where you really need to see that Awaken early, but Android 17 in the main I think is best. In terms of defending friends, we've gone down to 3 copies. This is for a couple of reasons. The 4th copy is in the side for specifically just Red Sin, but we found ourselves siding out the 4th copy in a huge number of matchups. So against SS4, this card can be ripped out by Broly Crown, which you should be playing around all the time anyways, but just in case they do resolve a Broly Crown against you, and you don't have like a Kusu to respond with, then this card can be ripped out by that. But more relevant than that, against SS4, this card gets hit by the Secret Rare, so you can't rely on this card as your 1-drop negate to negate the Secret Rare swing. So we took out a copy into the side deck and replaced it with some more extra card negates in the main, which is relevant for, like I said, the Secret Rare in SS4. And then against yellow, this is just a really bad card because first of all it gets T-blowed, and then second of all it also lets them restand the yellow Sin promo, because you played a battle card on their turn, and this is like one of the 2 battle cards that you play on their turn other than Kusu. But Kusu is like this card, there'll be turns where you have this card in your hand and you have to rely on it against yellow, whereas Kusu is just like an added bonus card. So we cut this down to 3 copies because it's not good against yellow and it's not really good against SS4. And then a lot of the other matchups we don't really need to be negating their swings, so we're siding it out anyways. Like against Gamma, we don't need to be, stopping their swings because we just kind of let them go through and combo out with the use of beans and super combos because they don't have the pressure to kind of push through. So that's kind of the logic behind that. The only matchup I'd ever side in the 4th copy is against Red Sin, which did end up coming up. Shout out to Andre for being my only Red Sin opponent over the weekend. But yeah, I'd say moving on into the next format, you can maybe just completely go down to 3 copies of this if you need more space in the sideboard. But the thing is, with this sideboard, I don't feel like there's a lot more that you can even put in, to be honest. It depends what the next format shapes up to be. If Power Pole or any sort of aggressive deck becomes like poppin', you probably just side the 4th copy of this still. And then for the extra cards, 3D Magics this time. We went down to 3D Magics because we were going through our spreadsheet which we have for this deck, and it is genuinely every matchup that we plan to play against, this card came out down to 3 copies when we were doing sideboarding. So we just figured, why are we running the 4th copy? Let's take out the 4th copy entirely and then put in the main deck some more tech to help with specific matchups, which we can then swap about depending on what we're against in games 2 and 3. But it means that we have space for cards like the Self-Awakeners. So in matchups where we need Self-Awakeners, suddenly we have them, and in matchups where we don't need Self-Awakeners, it's like the 4th D Magic wasn't helping in those matchups either. So it's just kind of tech choice for tech choice, and then we swap them out in games 2 and 3. But that's kind of the logic behind going down to 3D Magics. And again, this card does get sided out to 2 copies sometime. Like against yellow, a lot of the time it gets sided down to 2 copies, just because of the fact that they can use Cooler counter against it, but also you want to be siding in other cards against yellow. Against SS4, like I said, this card has to stay in because it's another extra card negate which you need for that secret rare. And then 3 copies of Bean, again, fairly standard. I don't think we were ever running 4 copies of this card. 3 copies has always been fine. Again, sometimes this goes down to 2 copies depending on the matchup. Against yellow, this card I think just always stays at 3 copies because yellow really struggles to deal with Bean. Like Golden Freezer getting the triple attack unison, Bean puts in work against that. Margin Vegeta, generally all of their swings are 15 to 25k, so Bean puts in work against that. And yeah, Bean is just very, very strong against yellow. Against Trunks Vegeta, a lot of their swings are 15 to 20k, so Bean puts in work against that. And it's also against yellow specifically a way to untap during your opponent's turn that can't be cooler countered, which is why I see it as more valuable than D-Magic. And then the last 2 cards of the main deck are the 2 Goku's Kamehameha Deflection, which we decided to put in the main because this card is just crazy. We were side decking it in the best of 1 pre-side, but we decided to put it in the main. It was the card that we sided in most across all of the matchups that we were expecting. At this and the Self-Awakener Android 17. It's really good against SS4, it's really good against Sin, it's really good against Majin Vegeta. It's just generally quite a good card as well. Like, it's another 1-drop negate, and it's also occasionally getting a pop stuff just in random matchups, which did end up coming up just in matchups where I didn't expect it. Like against Golden Freezer, you play it, you negate an attack, you pop like Riposte or something. It's just like free value, to be honest. It's really, really nice. And like I said before, this deck can sometimes struggle with removal because all of your removal is just the Z deck. And so if you don't have that Z energy, you're not removing their stuff, and so this kind of does help mitigate with that as well. But it's mostly the fact that we felt it was necessary for Red Sin and Gogeta going into game 1s. And then it also has the added bonus of really helping the Majin Vegeta matchup, which is kind of already a 1 matchup, but it's just a good card. And it also is really nice against Gamma. Again, Gamma is pretty much a free win for this deck, but it's nice just to kill their dual attacker if they ever get greedy with it. And then going on into the Z deck, so main deck is 50 cards. Like I say, I'm always going to be playing 50 cards. Nothing's going to make me go above 50. I don't see, like, yes, the deck space is really tight, but there's still ways you can work around it. We've adapted the main deck and the side deck to make sure that you can always side in the cards that you need for each matchup. And you just have to like go down to bare bone necessities of like, I really need this card in this matchup, I need to be siding it in. Or this card is kind of nice, but I don't actually need it to be winning the matchup, it's just a win more card. Like, that's where a lot of the skill of building this deck came down to, is like figuring out what cards will actually win more and what matchups we were losing if we didn't see X card or Y card. So that's, I think, a lot of the skill of deck building in general, and that's what me and Tom spent a lot of time working on, is keeping this deck at 50, because it was tricky because the deck space is super tight, but it was very important because you need to be seeing your check lands early, your super combos early, your energy fixes early. This deck is effectively a combo deck. It just sets up a big combo and then continues to loop it over and over. And so you need to see those combo pieces. And again, the Zamasu Unison isn't even searchable. You need that card a lot of the time. That card is your that card is how you stabilize and regenerate your hand size. So anyways, moving on to the Z deck, we have 1 Surmounting. Like I said, turn 1 Surmounting, I've been preaching about it for a very long time playing this deck. Turn 1 Surmounting puts in work against people who don't expect it, and nobody really expects a turn 1 Surmounting. The 1 copy of the 2-drop In the Name of Peace, again, these are kind of your Z-Deck Self-Awakeners, so these are really nice because if you play one of these early and on a turn where they can't necessarily counterplay, ideally that's going to be the Surmounting because it's a 1-drop rather than a 2-drop, and especially, like, people do not want to counterplay Surmounting because it's not a huge investment, and they'll see you go from 8 to 7 and go, oh, I'll just counterplay the next Self-Awakener, and then you drop the Android 17 and just awaken for free. So that's some of the power behind the Surmounting really as well. But In the Name of Peace, this card is obviously really nice for the turn 1 ramp, but people are expecting that a lot now, or the turn 2 ramp, sorry. People are expecting that a lot now, and a lot of the time you also can't afford to do it because unless you've developed a Trading Places turn 1 and then you've been able to awaken turn 2, you're not going to be able to go into your opponent's turn with any energy untapped. And by that point as well, you probably don't have Sparking for D-Magic live. And a lot of your hand is going to be 1 cost 10k, so you can't even combo your hand to create that Sparking D-Magic. So a lot of the time if you ramp on turn 2 against a lot of decks, you're just going to get blown out and put to 2 life instantly, especially if you go second as well. So it's very risky to do this a lot of the time, but a lot of the time what I was just using this card for was a cheaper way to bring out the 4-drop later on as some cheap removal. And it was also really nice for playing around Broly Crown, because there are some times where you're untapping more than enough energy, and so you're kind of going to waste your own energy by untapping, because you, like, if I'm going into my opponent's turn with 3 energy untapped, which is what you want to be doing against every red deck, because you can then Kusu on the Broly Crown, get a card out their hand, get rid of the Broly Crown so they lose 2 cards in hand and 1 energy, and then you still have an energy untapped so that you can still defend with. So against every red deck, it's important to learn to sequence so that you go into every turn with 3 energy open and a Kusu in hand, or 1 energy open if you don't have the Kusu. But this was really nice for against red if I was untapping more than enough energy. So if I had 3 energy open and I was already untapping 2 because I'd used a trading places on my opponent's turn, or if I had 4 energy open and I was already untapping 1 going into my opponent's next turn, I just dropped this as a way to spend energy and then potentially get like a ramp off. And then, like, if they counterplay it, sure, I don't actually lose anything from hand. They lost a card from hand for the counterplay. And if they don't counterplay, I get a ramp, I get a removal. It's not too bad. And it's just some nice bodies to get down. And then the blocker from the 4-drop Z battle card is very relevant if I have a unison down, just to kind of almost guarantee that I get trading places off each turn. And also another valuable part about this card is that it can also bring out the Cell Z battle card, because it's an android that costs 4 or less. So there were times where I was just playing this card as another cheap way to bring out Cell, rather than one of the 2 4-drops which we run. But again, like, sometimes later on you just play this card because it's a cheaper way to play one of these cards, and you don't really care about the Z stack on the 4-drop all that much. And then the last 2 Z battle cards are 1 Beerus. This guy comes up sometimes, like every single Z battle card came up for me, because like I said, the Z deck is your removal in this deck. And it just kind of depends on the matchup which one is going to come up more. And then the last Z battle card is the Vegito, which is just like, if this card stays for more than a turn, you just win the game, and sometimes you just use it to bait stuff. So against yellow, something I really like doing is, if you're in a good position and you're going to be untapping quite a few energy going into your opponent's next turn, so you can just kind of spend energy for resources, you can drop this guy and then untap your energy, and then most yellow decks out to this is going to be the new yellow Z battle card, the 3-cost Vegeta AOD. So they're going to invest 3 energy and 2 Z energy into killing this, which, yes, you look at this card and you look at that card, they're definitely spending less resources because they're spending 2 less energy, 1 less Z energy. But that's when you drop Kusu down, and then you bottom deck the Z battle card that they play, you bottom deck a card out of their hand, or you force out a T-Blow, which T-Blow hits a lot of stuff in this deck, so forcing out a T-Blow with that is also absolutely fine, because you'd rather them T-Blow the Kusu there than T-Blow like an Android 17 later on, or your Self-Awaken as early as well. And so you can either force out T-Blow, which is still another card out their hand as well, or you can just clear the Z battle card and then get a card out their hand. Yes, they still pop Vegito, but Vegito also removed a battle card and a card out their hand at the end of each of your turns that it was alive for. So it's still like a super valuable trade, because in that trade you potentially get like 2 or 3 cards out their hand and remove 2 battle cards off their board. And you just completely bait them into that, because there's no other really good efficient barrier removal that yellow has, so they're gonna always be going for that play if they have the Z energy. And going into the side deck, we have 2 5-drop Majin Boos. This card basically comes in against every yellow deck, because it can clear out the Gohan, and people are probably going to be siding the Gohan unison against you, because it does do work against this deck if you don't prepare for it. If they're not already mainboarding it, like if they're playing Golden Frieza or something. This card also comes in against Set 20 Android 21. The new strategy for Set 20 Android 21 matchup, which me and Tom have been working on, which worked wonders for both of us in the tournament. I think that both of us played against one Set 20 Android 21, and both of us won our rounds, which was absolutely crazy, because that is meant to be one of the worst matchups for this deck. But the new strategy which we figured out is to just stay on front side. Don't Self-Awaken against Set 20 Android 21. Keep your Self-Awakeners in the deck, the Android 17s, but you do not side the Gohans against that matchup. And you just kind of wait for them to hit you down, because if you think about it, you're both drawing the same number of cards. Even on their front side, they're taking their own life, which I wouldn't consider a draw because you're going to also take your own life eventually when they start hitting you. So they're just kind of getting cards to their hand earlier than you would, but you'll still be getting that same number of cards to your hand. And then they're searching top 5 for an android, so they get +1 off of that. And you're swinging and drawing a card on your front side, so you get +1 off of that. So you're kind of going even in hand advantage there. And the same on the backside. On the backside of the Android 21 leader, they just activate main, draw a card. You swing, draw a card. So it's still the same thing. You have no reason to actually awaken in terms of card advantage. If you awaken, however, you have to start playing battle cards to then be able to draw and untap, which gives them free energy. Even if you are swinging with it, it just gives them free cards for you, for them to untap during each of their turns to get free energy. And if you use the Z battle cards to awaken, then you're not going to ever be able to kill them off your own board, and they're never going to kill them off your board because it's free energy for them for the rest of the game. So you do not want to be self-awakening against Android 21. Another reason why you wouldn't want to do that is because you win the late game against that deck. So you don't want to be putting yourself in a position where you're taking more damage so that they can kill you quicker in the early game. And so you just want to play for the late game, and then once they start hitting you down, you maybe play one Self-Awakener if you need to, and then you awaken. But you want to take as long as possible awakening in that matchup, because it's just better for you to get to the late game than it is for them. There's not a whole lot they can do about tap 7 into Bad Omens or Measureless Strengths. And on top of that, the later into the game you get, the more energy you're going to have to rival the Android 18 onto every one of their 8 drops, which is huge, because a lot of the time in testing, when we were testing before developing this idea, a lot of the time it was just they'd get 8 drop down on like turn 3 because they'd get their Z deck, like, you know, they'd ramp off of their Z battle cards and we'd be playing stuff to awaken, and suddenly they have like loads of energy, they just play an 8 drop on turn 3 and then they start smashing our face in, and we don't have the energy to rival an Android 18. Sometimes we'd still be on 2 energy even, so there's no way we can rival the Android 18, let alone get set up and then rival it in. So at that point they just kind of smash us down and there's nothing we can do. If we just play to not awaken and sit there and do nothing, we're absolutely fine. We just sit there and we wait, and then it gets to like turn 4 or 5, we start untapping 2 energy a turn, and we start rivaling Android 18s on every single 8 drop that comes down. And they only have 4 8 drops, and a lot of the time they're going to be, you know, having to combo off some of them because it's a free 10k. So it's very important to just kind of keep track of where their 8 drops are all the time. The reason we side in the Boo against that deck is because some builds will be running Turning the Tide, and Turning the Tide isn't a threat against this deck unless they have a board developed. So the 2 copies of Boo, they kind of do 2 things. They act as a prevention measure for Turning the Tide, because you can clear their board going into turn 7, and then it's kind of the same as using the Jiren Survival of the Fittest, except it's just more flexible of a card, because you want to be siding this in against other matchups that aren't going to be playing Turning the Tide as well. On top of that though, it's also obviously nice hand control, and it's just a nice card to have out. But on top of that, if you're playing against an Android 21 player and they're not attacking you and they're just building a board, and then their idea is like they're going to just kill you in 1 turn, which is a very good way to play against this deck, and it's a very good counter strategy if it's a deck that obviously doesn't need to swing to get advantage. This card is another prevention measure against that sort of strategy. Along with your SCR, it just means that if they end up building that board and they like play a couple of guys, maybe they play an 8 drop down and then they just pass, and then next turn they play another 8 drop down, or they play like some 4 drops and then they pass again. If they do any of that, or even if they just have an 8 drop down on board and you drop this guy, it's so punishing for them. It's important to bear in mind that it's very rare that you'll be able to prevent them from attacking your leader with this card, because they can just switch it to active mode and then leave it there in active mode off of their leader skill. But it's still important to swing with the card, because otherwise they can use it for free green energy, so that's important to note. But yeah, the Boo definitely comes in against set 20 Android 21 because of this new strategy that me and Tom have been working on. The 2 Gohans, I decided to cut Gohan down to 2. The main difference between mine and Tom's list was that he was on a 3rd Gohan and 2 Black Smoke. I'm on 3 Black Smoke and 2 Gohan. The reason why I cut the Gohan down to 2 is I found I wasn't siding it in as many matchups. A lot of the time the Android 17 is more reliable because of counterplays like T-Blow or the Let the Battle Begin Android 18. But this card did come up like in matchups where you do want to be Self-Awakening, you still side this card in. And there were times where I still drew this on turn 1, like against Golden Frieza, and it was just like completely blowout stuff. So it's still a very good card to side. I just don't think there's enough space to kind of side cards out from the main deck to allow for a third copy of this to then be sided in the matchups where you need it. And then the other 2 cards here are 2 Dirty Burst, rest in peace. This is surprisingly enough not for SS4 Gogeta. You never ever side this card against SS4 Gogeta. If they're playing the 8-drop against you at any point in the game, they're just trolling. Because the main power of that 8-drop is the fact that it can clear the board and then apply pressure to your hand size by hitting your face. But the fact that you don't build a board in this deck means that you don't care about it. And then on top of that, the fact that you recycle super combos and a lot of your deck is 1-cost 10Ks means that comboing out of the attack is like next to nothing. There was an SS4 player that I played against who dropped the 8-drop on me, and I super comboed. I comboed a 1-cost 10K and then comboed a 5K. So I comboed 3 cards out my hand, but it was his entire turn to play the 8-drop, and he also lost a card from hand for my super combo, a card from hand for his 8-drop, and a card from hand for the Union Fusion, because he drops the Goku and Vegeta and draws a card, so it's still a -1. So he went -3 and I went -3 for his whole turn. That was it. So that's why you do not need Dirty Burst in this matchup, because also at the time where he dropped that card, my entire board, it was like turn 5 I think, and my board was a 1-drop. It was just a 1-drop to cycle my energy. So I was not fussed about that card dying. I had Key Channeler in my energy to replace it next turn. And it's just another turn where they're not really applying pressure to you. So you never need this card against SS4 Gogeta for this deck. And also if you can set it up correctly, you just cycle super combos back to your hand on turns where they could potentially drop the 8-drop. You just cycle supers back to your hand preemptively so that you can just make them bottom deck their whole hand when they drop an 8-drop. Yeah. SS4 players should not be dropping 8-drops against this deck. Luckily, we don't need to worry about that deck anymore now, and we also don't ever get to side Dirty Burst again, which is kind of a downside. But yeah, this card is not for SS4 Gogeta. This card is for Golden Cooler SCR. It's just so that you can, because you can play around Golden Cooler SCR in this deck very easily, because you can play so that you don't build a massive hand size and just super combo super aggressively to make sure that neither player has a hand size higher than 5. But it's much easier and much better to just not do that. So in games 2 and 3, if you can find a Dirty Burst, you can just play super greedy throughout the whole game, and spend everything, like make sure that you're defending your Unison instead of like super comboing super aggressively. And then as long as your Unison is surviving, your hand size is going to be pretty huge in comparison to normal. And so you can just kind of use Dirty Burst to either bait a Golden Cooler SCR down, or just as a way to be greedy with your hand size. But these are like the 6 cards that I'd recommend siding in against Golden Frieza. And then generally against most other yellow decks, it's just going to be these 4 cards. Dirty Burst is only going in if you know they're playing Golden Cooler. And like I mentioned, the boot also comes in against set 20 Android 21. We're also running 3 Desperate Measures, which again is for set 20 Android 21, but also the Mirror Match. And the Mirror Match, I'd be siding in 3 Desperate Measures and 2 Gohan, because you want those Self-Awakeners. Desperate Measures is huge because going first, it means you can counterplay, or going second, sorry, you can counterplay the ramp, because you can obviously hit the 2-drop. But you don't necessarily need this card in the main deck, because it's not very good generically. It's mainly just good against Android 21 and set 20 Android 21. There's not much else that it really hits in the format right now. Maybe that changes going into next format. I don't expect it to change. You also don't care about hitting floodgates with this card, because you're not really going that aggressive with your attackers. You're more just kind of attacking to bait out floodgates to make them lose more hands, or more hand size. But yeah, this is mainly just to prevent the ramp going second against the Android 21 decks. Going first, we do have also Kusu in the main, so if you go first against those decks, you can either bait the Kusu or just kind of draw it and then make sure that they then can't play there. Or if they do go for the ramp, you can just Kusu it away. So that's huge. But yeah, You don't need this card in the main deck in my opinion, because first of all, it's not generically good, and second of all, you already have an answer for the thing that this card answers as long as you go first. So it's kind of a situational card, but in those games where you do go second against Android 21, you kind of need to see this card. And then for a couple of one-offs, we have one Bad Omen and one Defending Friends, which were cards that I was obviously maining before. But we then moved into the side deck. The Bad Omen is specifically for Set 20, Android 21, and the Mirror Match. Arguably, you can probably just cut this card. I think this was the weakest card in my sideboard all day. I don't think I ever sided it in because the Set 20 Android 21 matchup I played, it just went to game 1. Like, I won game 1 and that was it. We never got to game 2. And in the Mirror Match, which I played against Tom, I didn't even side this card in. I just forgot about it because it's not even that necessary of a card in the Mirror matchup. So you can just get away with 2 copies of it in the main. The Defending Friends, like I said, is for Sin, and if the format develops into an aggressive format with like Power Pole and stuff, it's probably still a good card, but now that Sin's gone, you could probably consider getting rid of it as well. It's just a question of what would you replace it with. And then another one-off is the third Goku's Kamehameha Deflection. This is again just for every matchup that I listed before that this card is good against, so Majin Vegeta, SS4 and Sin. It's still a very good card going into next format just because it's just a very efficient card in general. But again, Majin Vegeta is going to be a strong deck next format, so this card is good against that. And then last 3 cards of the sideboard are 3 Black Smokes. You want this against SS4, you want this against Gamma. And that's about it, I think. Against SS4, this is really important, and that's why I ended up deciding to go for a third copy of this, where Tom opted for the third copy of the Gohan. I think he was more worried about the Mirror matchup, as well as the Set 20 Android 21 matchup, and just general like yellow decks stalling us at 8 life, which is fair enough. But I figured we had enough Self-Awakeners, and especially because we have 2 Self-Awakeners always accessible in the Z deck, that kind of helped mitigate for things. Whereas the third Black Smoke is huge against SS4. You really want to see this card turn 2 against SS4 so that you can awaken and play it in the same turn, and then use the energy that you awaken with and key channeler and all that stuff to then defend your next turn. And then you just keep dropping these on the Unisons. And as long as the Unison doesn't stick, that deck is really not a problem for this deck to deal with. So that's kind of why I felt like Black Smoke was important, because the Unison really stops, like killing the Unison stops a lot of their aggression and also a lot of their draw power. So this card is, yeah, very, very nice against SS4. Luckily, we don't need to worry about that matchup anymore. It's also nice against Gamma. Again, we don't need to worry about that matchup anymore. I don't know what the side deck will look like going into next format, because I imagine it would change quite a bit. Obviously, Dirty Burst come out. Black Smoke could maybe come out depending on if there's any Unison-based strategies going around. And like I mentioned, the Bad Omen probably comes out as well. And then you can maybe side in things like Koitsukaya, Dark Power, Black Marseillan if you really want to go in on the new Android 21 matchup. Although then there's a question of what do you side out from the main deck in that matchup, which is a big question in this deck. You have to ask yourself that question every time you change a card in the sideboard. You have to go, okay, what matchup am I siding this card in? And do I have space to be siding cards in for that matchup? The answer is most likely no, unfortunately. But that's why we've gone for this side deck, because against SS4 you would side like these 4 cards. Against Sin you'd be siding these 2. Like against Android 21 decks you'd be siding these 5, and then against yellow you'd be siding well, against the Mirror Match you side these 5, against new Android 21 you side these 5, and then against yellow decks you side these 4, and against Golden Freezer or yellow decks that you know are going to run Golden Cooler you side these 6. And then Bad Omen just kind of comes in sometimes if you randomly find the space on the day. I don't know, but like I said, this is what we've been working on a lot with the sideboard, is making sure that we don't really side in more than 4 cards per matchup, and in the matchups where we really need to, so like Golden Freezer is the main example of that, we side in like 5 or 6. And the other main example is like the Mirror and the Set 20 Android 21 deck. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what the sideboard is meant to look like. Obviously it all changes next format. Dirty Burst goes, 3 of the biggest decks in the game go, so that's huge. I don't really know what the sideboard will look like I've said. I think that you would definitely keep these in. You probably keep this in. This maybe stays depending on whether there's aggressive decks still running around. Desperate Measures has to stay in because Set 20 Android 21 will be a deck still. These cards I'd say come out. Well, DUBS definitely does. Bad Omen probably. And Black Smokes, it depends on what's going to be good. Same with the Android 17 here. But we'll see what happens going into next set. I'm very excited for the ban list to be live, and I'm very excited for next set to be live. We get to play Black again and not have to worry about SS4 or Gamma or Sin, so that's going to be great. Hope you guys enjoyed the deck profile. Hope you guys enjoyed kind of the breakdown. This was meant to be a lot shorter. It didn't end up. When am I ever going to do a short deck profile, man? Like, I wasn't even explaining the cards there. I was just explaining where they come in and out. But hopefully you guys enjoyed me rambling about this deck. Yeah, managed to win both the Zenkai Cup and the regionals, which is pretty insane. I'm very happy with that. And shout out to Tom again for being an absolute laddo and helping me out with this deck as much as he could. And yeah, just keeping me motivated to play it, to be honest. Hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll be catching you guys in the next one.